In part one, we looked at Pereboom's two main theses, the idea that there is no free will that is sufficient for allowing for moral responsibility. And then the second thesis that this isn't a problem, right? That it might even be beneficial to recognize that nobody ever is morally responsible for what they do. So here we are looking at some consequences from Pereboom's perspective. And then at the end, I will raise a few criticisms. So what Pereboom does is he has 5 different consequences. Some of these might seem problematic. Some of these might appear good on the surface. Pereboom thinks they're all very reasonable and something that is believable. So how could we live without free will and without moral responsibility? It is in our nature, it seems almost, that we will praise people for doing good things, blame people for doing bad things, hold people morally responsible for what they do. Now, Pereboom has 5 consequences here. So the first one is, well, look, instead of blame and praise, there are ways that we can replace these. We can still admonish and encourage. Now, I'm not exactly sure how this is going to go, but say somebody steals something from you, and our natural inclination would be holding them morally responsible and blameworthy. But I think the idea here is no, we instead admonish them and encourage them by saying something along the lines, and meaning it, of course, that you should not have done that. You can do better than that. Something along those lines. Okay, consequences related to punishment. So punishment is a concern. And what Pereboom does is he has 4 broad general theories of punishment. And obviously, we're not going to go through those in great detail, each of these deserving of great exploration. But there are 4 broad theories of punishment that he considers. One is a retributivist justification for punishment. So the idea here is that if somebody causes suffering, they deserve to suffer in return. If somebody brings about something really good, they deserve to be rewarded. Now, primarily, since we're talking about punishment, we're talking about the negative side of things. We're talking about typical approaches that we normally might consider blameworthy, but Pereboom does not. And obviously, he says, on my view, this is going to be ruled out. There's no justification to harm someone just because they've caused harm, because they're not morally responsible for what they've done. So we rule that approach to punishment out. Another theory of punishment is kind of a moral education theory. And this is very common among parents. So with a child, the child does something wrong, you take something away from them. You put them on a timeout. Or if they're older, you take their phone away for a period of time, or something like that. Well, Pereboom says that might be okay. It might be helpful. It might be a way for people to develop right behavior, good behavior. But he's not so sure that this actually works. And so he says, I want to see more data. I want to see some empirical support before I would endorse this approach to punishment. A third approach to punishment is deterrence. The idea is that we punish people in order to deter bad behavior. And so, for example, somebody steals a car, we catch them, they may serve time in jail. And this is a deterrence for 2 directions. One is the individual who got caught. The idea is, well, they won't do that again because they are not going to want to be in jail again. And the other is so that everybody else in society knows that there's going to be a problem if you go and steal somebody's car, right? But this isn't ruled out by hard incompatibilism. It's not ruled out by Pereboom's view per se, but Pereboom has a big concern here. This deterrence theory is really based on utilitarian principles. That is, if we do this, this will be better for society, right? And the problem with that is if you're fully utilitarian, This might allow you to punish innocent people for the purpose of deterrence. So maybe there's a large crime that can't be solved, and so the police get together and they decide, well, we'll just find somebody, blame that person, punish that person. This will help society know that we can catch you and that you shouldn't do this. But obviously that would be immoral to harm the innocent here. So he's concerned that since deterrence theory relies on a utilitarian basis, that's not a good approach for punishment. One more approach to punishment that Pereboom considers is an isolation theory. And he says this might be the best approach. Think quarantines for people in health concerns. Somebody has a very contagious disease, so we want them to stay isolated for a while so they don't spread that disease. A common idea after COVID-19. And so the idea is if you are testing positive, you need to stay away from other people. It's not your fault. We're not necessarily blaming you for anything that you've done, but we need to protect other people from you in the sense of you might harm them by giving them COVID-19. So in this case, if somebody is a serial killer, say, well, if we catch the individual, we might isolate them and say, well, we're going to prevent you from interacting with people in society so that you don't harm these other people in society. And Pereboom says this might be a good idea. This might be a good approach, but notice it needs to be limited to only what is necessary, and it has to include attempts at rehabilitation. So even if we're isolating someone for repetitive thefts or serial killers, as I suggested, we need to try to work with them to rehabilitate them. Also, we should note that the overall effect here, if we really took this seriously, that's the only reason we're ever going to punish anyone, think about it in our legal system, the result of such a policy would be that many and probably most, probably the vast majority of those who are currently imprisoned wouldn't be imprisoned. Because there's not this severe harm that we think is going to immediately happen if somebody is allowed to continue their life. Now, it's questionable, right? How many people would need to stay in prison? How many not? Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it's not the vast majority. But Pereboom would certainly say that many who are in prison now shouldn't be. And so of the four theories of punishment, the isolation theory is the only one that really fits with Pereboom's ideas. And then it has this consequence that we would have to do a major overhaul of our judicial and punishment system. Okay, a third aspect where there will be consequences of accepting hard incompatibilism and the idea that no one's ever morally responsible is questioning meaning in life. It seems like then hard indeterminism is going to undermine one's life's hopes of being praiseworthy or for achievement. So some people are motivated to do really well in order to have an achievement acknowledged in public and for people to praise them. Many people who win a Nobel Prize might be humble at their acceptance, and many of them may not have sought out a Nobel Prize, but I guarantee many of them that would be their life goal, and they really wanted to be able to say that they are a Nobel Prize winner. And of course, it doesn't have to be that big. It could be a promotion. It could be something else that where you feel like you're being praised and acknowledged for your work. And we seek these things. And it seems like this approach, hard incompatibilism, would undermine that. Now, Pereboom says, but wait, no, there's still going to be room for enjoying the achievements. So if you do get a promotion, you can still enjoy the benefits of that promotion. If you win a Nobel Prize, you can still enjoy the lectures that you're going to be able to give after that and make even more money after that by giving the lectures. So you can do that. Now, a critic might say, well, wait, wouldn't accepting hard indeterminism have the result that people might resign themselves to their negative behavioral disposition. So somebody who says, well, I just have these bad habits, and well, there's nothing I can do. So I'm just rude to somebody. I'm just rude to people in general. That's my nature. I don't like people, so I'm going to be rude. That's my nature. That's who I am. I'm not morally responsible for this. So it's not something that I should be punished for, according to hard incompatibilism. So, why bother changing? I mean, I really can't change. It's not up to me. Now, this seems fairly significant, but Pereboom says, no, we don't have to resign ourselves, right? Because, why? Epistemically, we don't know if we might be able to overcome these problematic habits. We don't know if, even though we're rude now to a lot of people, we may be able to get better and not be so rude and dismissive of other people's ideas, for example. Some challenges can be met, success might be possible, so we can still work on this. Now, here is a place where a lot of people are not that satisfied with Pereboom's response. It does seem like resignation might be a natural response to learning that you aren't morally responsible for anything that you do. Another concern is that of self-respect. It seems like, we encourage people to have respect for themselves, right? You can do better. You can achieve. You are worthy of praise, and you deserve to respect yourself because of that. I am woman. I am strong. You hear this from the feminist movement, other groups of people who I identify, and these are generally considered to be good things in society. Pereboom says, well, consider these things. Look, we appreciate native athletic ability, somebody who can sprint really fast, right? It's their native athletic ability. Most of us genetically aren't predisposed to be a world-class sprinter. It's just not in our nature, and some people are, and we can appreciate that. Beauty, intelligence are not produced voluntarily. We don't choose to be a beautiful person or an ugly person. We don't choose to be brilliant or not so brilliant, but we can still appreciate the people who are beautiful or intelligent or have this native athletic ability. So Pereboom says we don't have to be praiseworthy. We can still value things that we normally might be praiseworthy for, but now that we understand it, we shouldn't be. Why not would we also value hard work? If we could say that, sure, the person's not praiseworthy for it, but we can value it just like we value intelligence or beauty or generous actions. We don't necessarily praise somebody for it because, of course, they're not morally responsible for doing these generous actions, but we might appreciate it. Even if, of course, as his view states, they're not produced voluntarily, right? People are determined to do these things, or if indeterminism is true, it's just kind of luck that they ended up doing these things. So when somebody realizes, though, Pereboom, says this, when somebody realizes that their success they've had in their career was largely dependent on other things, external factors like their upbringing, their, again, native abilities, the opportunities that were provided by the society they were raised in, assistance from others, good fortune, just being in the right place at the right time, that often results in gratitude and not despair. So, I might say myself that, well, there's a certain native intellectual ability that one needs to have to be a professional philosopher. I was raised in a family that allowed me to go to college and then had the good fortune of marrying someone who supported me while I went through graduate school and so on. And these are things that are much, for the most part, out of my control. And so I should just be grateful for where I am, but not not think I'm praiseworthy because of that. That's Pereboom's approach. Now, I might add that if he takes this path, one might be concerned about the flip side, right? The negative side. What if you don't have a lot of these things? What if you had a really poor upbringing? You didn't have opportunities provided by society. Those were not available to you. You didn't have other people supporting you. You weren't in the right place at the right time. And so your life has not turned out very well. Now, if on the positive side that's going to result in gratitude, wouldn't that have a negative effect on somebody? I don't know what the opposite of gratitude is, but it seems like maybe there would be bitterness or despair in that situation. And so I'm not sure what Pereboom would have to say about the flip side there, but that's a concern that might be raised. But in any case, Pereboom goes on to consider personal relationships. Now, this seems to be significant. So a problem with interpersonal relationships is we have reactive attitudes. Those things are normal. So indignation at somebody that harms you, gratitude to somebody, forgiveness when somebody who is close to you harms you, but you want to maintain that relationship. Love, these things enrich our lives, but wouldn't we have to give these up if hard incompatibilism is correct? Now, Pereboom says, yes, we would have to give these things up. You do have to give up indignation. Now, here he says you have to give up gratitude. Now, but then he still talks about having gratitude. So I'm not sure where gratitude goes, if it's still there or if it's not. I don't think he's fully consistent on that. But in any case, he says it's not that bad. For example, indignation, we can live without it, right? It could be replaced maybe with expressions of sadness or maybe concern for somebody else. Like you've harmed somebody. That's not good, and I don't feel good when you do that, and maybe you could do better, right? Now, forgiveness does seem to go away, says Pereboom, but still, you can choose not to reject someone if they've changed. So if somebody harms you, maybe they do feel bad about it. Of course, they shouldn't be blaming themselves, but they think that's not a good thing, and so they change. They say, we won't do that, and so you can continue to have that relationship. But there's not really forgiveness, because forgiveness involves an acknowledgement that somebody's worthy of blame. So it's not forgiveness, but it's something else. Guilt, repentance, those things are gone. Those don't really make sense if there's no moral responsibility. But those seem to be important for many people. In fact, this is one of my criticisms for Pereboom. He identifies himself as a Christian, and so I have no doubts that he isn't. I mean, certainly he is, so let's just say that. But if you don't have repentance and guilt, a lot of Christian theology seems to be problematic. You can acknowledge wrongdoing, though, says Pereboom. You can feel sad, again, commit to doing what you ought to do. Now let's consider this a little bit more with personal relationships. He does say here that you could still express gratitude. So earlier he said you're going to have to get rid of it, but here he says, no, you can still express it, but you have to make sure how that gratitude is going. So for example, gratitude doesn't always involve the belief that somebody is praiseworthy. He says, so for example, you can be grateful to a child who's kind, or a pet who greets you when you return home, or otherwise expresses kindness to you or to someone else. You can be grateful for that. Now, note that if he's going to suggest that this is how we can replace gratitude in the sense of attributing praise to someone, you are going to have to treat other adults like you now treat a child or a pet. right? It's kind of a, oh, good job, or I appreciate that, but not as if they are worthy of praise for being kind, right? Because nobody is. A person is no more praiseworthy than a dog that greets you out of habit when you come home. And what Pereboom, here is a big one, right? So somebody might be concerned about love, right? Mature love. And Pereboom says, no, that's not threatened. So first of all, consider parental love. And that doesn't seem to be voluntary. It's just a natural result for parents that love their kids. That's not a free action, Pereboom says. It's just something that's innate in us to love our children. Well, again, this might be questionable here, and we'll raise this question in a moment. But Pereboom goes on to say moral character is lovable, whether or not it merits praise. It's enjoyable. We can be grateful in this modified sense, even though somebody is not praiseworthy. Okay, now a little bit more direct challenge to follow up on this. Kane, for example, Robert Kane asked, how would you feel if someone was manipulated or somehow causally determined to love you? How would you feel if you found out your wife had a controlling chip, or your husband had a controlling chip, or your love of your life, whoever that might be, had a controlling chip in them, and somebody was manipulating them to do things, to want to spend time with you, to do things for you, to tell you how great you are, to do all these things? How would you feel about such a person, knowing that they were manipulated? It seems like that would really undermine things. So this does seem to be problematic. Now, Pereboom responds to this. He says, look, you have a choice to love or not, but it doesn't need to be a full-blooded choice in the sense that we normally think about. Consider arranged marriages. So a choice to love doesn't have to be undetermined, which of course from Pereboom's perspective would just be random anyway. It could be determined, just like people who are in arranged marriages. And he says arranged marriages often work. You know, couples stay together. They seem to appreciate one another. Now, my own response to this is to raise this question, but why? Why do they work? And it seems to me they work because the people choose to make it work, right? Just like almost every other normal marriage, right? Suppose you're celebrating somebody's 50th anniversary and they've been a loving couple for 50 years. Now, think about this though, right? They're not at all the same person they were, either one of them, when they got married. When they got married, they committed themselves to someone who's very different, certainly looked very different, had a lot more energy than the person they love now, you know, was more creative and active probably than the person they love now 50 years later, right? All of these kinds of things have changed, and yet they choose to be committed and to love one another. I don't know. That, to me, it seems like that is a choice. Even in an arranged marriage, it's a choice that has to be made. Of course, that's my libertarian perspective coming through. Now, what Pereboom says is, look, if that's what you want, if you desire this freely chosen love, that you think that's so valuable, well, you're asking for something that's impossible, of course, which would be the case on hard incompatibilism. Now, finally, Pereboom talks about some benefits of hard incompatibilism. He says there are very positive things if we accept his point of view. One of them is the elimination of moral anger. So we don't have reason to carry around anger toward other people if we accept and acknowledge hard incompatibilism. And that seems like a good thing, right? We eliminate a lot of anger in the world that causes a lot of problems. Now, a downside that Pereboom acknowledges is that it seems like moral anger helps motivate us to resist abuse. Think of civil rights movements. People get angry about the way people are treated, and that motivates them to try to change society. This is true for oppression, for other kinds of injustices as well. On our campus, we celebrate Take Back the Night, and it seems like some of the motivation is a moral anger about how horribly women have been mistreated and abused, and over time, and by men especially, and that motivates us to try to change society. And that seems like a good thing, right? So it seems like we don't want to get rid of moral anger because it brings about a better society in many situations. Now, Pereboom's response is, but okay, maybe that's the case, but the negative effects are really significant and we need to acknowledge those. The problem is that moral anger often fails to benefit the one it's directed at. So if you're angry at a certain group of people, you're not benefiting those people typically, right? You want to harm them is often associated with the anger, right? And it's actually often destructive to both parties. So bring this down to an individual level. Somebody's harmed you. You have moral anger directed toward them. You want to harm them. You are holding this against them. That's not good for your own psychological health. And it's certainly not good for that person if they experience the brunt of your anger, right? So Pereboom is saying, you know what, maybe we have moral anger doing some good things, but the downsides are even worse. And so overall, if we accepted hard incompatibilism and we got rid of moral anger, our interrelationships, our society would be better off. In fact, on a larger scale, he says ethnic conflicts are often fueled by moral anger. Think of Hitler getting people excited. Think of any other groups, ethnic conflicts that you've heard about. It's always often, scapegoating. And these people have caused all this trouble for you. And these people have harmed you to a great deal. And so we need to, push them down. And Pereboom says, if you got rid of moral anger, you might get rid of a lot of ethnic conflicts. In addition, hard incompatibilism completely, well, I shouldn't say in addition, but it is going to rule out this moral anger. It's going to get rid of the destructive force that moral anger often causes. And so again, overall, Pereboom says that's a good thing. Now, let me just mention another downside, and I'm not going to write this out on the screen, but for many people, getting rid of blameworthy ideas, the idea that other people are sometimes blameworthy or praiseworthy, it's just simply unbelievable. Somebody harms you, you experience this sense of blame toward the other person. You believe they are doing things wrong and maybe they deserve some form of punishment. You certainly blame them for what they've done, or you praise them. Now, when I say it's simply unbelievable, well, that's not an answer to an argument. Okay, so I'm not just saying, okay, he's got a great argument, but I can't believe it, so I don't know what I'm going to do, right? The idea is, as a famous saying goes, one person's modus tollens is another person's modus ponens, or the opposite is typically the way it's said. In other words, look, the denial of his conclusion, the idea that we actually do have moral responsibility, is much more plausible than the premises that were being provided for the conclusion themselves. In other words, some people say, well, let me see, agent causation is unlikely or implausible, says Pereboom. Well, I don't know that that's the case. Libertarians would say, I don't really believe that. I think it is still consistent with contemporary science. And I know I don't believe the conclusion. And so in order to convince me that the conclusion is true, you need some more other premises that are much more plausible in order for me to give up this hard, internal, firmly committed belief that I have that people are morally blameworthy or praiseworthy. All right, so that's how many people respond to Pereboom.